I'll always remember the heartfelt conversation I had with my father when I told him about my engagement. He pulled me aside and with a concerned look asked me if I was truly sure about marrying Stephen. He acknowledged my love for Stephen but expressed doubts about whether he was the right match for me. Confused, I questioned why he felt that way. My father explained that, although Stephen was affectionate and respectful, he sensed something off about him and his mother that he couldn't quite explain, attributing it to a father's instinct. Despite my protests, my father shared his observations that Stephen often bragged about my wealth to his friends, portraying me as a trophy rather than a partner. He was worried that Stephen's affection was not genuine. At that time, I brushed off my father's concerns, blinded by love and the desire to cling to a relationship that I believed would sustain me, especially after losing my mother 3 years prior and with my father's health declining. My father had built his wealth through savvy investments and hard work, setting a comfortable life for us. I too was making a decent living from my job. In contrast, Stephen and his mother Megan came from a modest background and often expressed their dissatisfaction with not having enough. Even after moving into my house post-marriage, they remained unhappy, always yearning for more luxurious and expensive lifestyles. Looking back, I realized that perhaps my father saw what I couldn't see at the time. I was a young woman in love, trying to hold on to something that felt like it would give me a reason to keep going despite the grief and loneliness I felt. Stephen and Megan, while they became my new family, perhaps weren't the sanctuary I hoped they would be. I vividly recall the moment when Stephen and his mother, Megan, lamented the size of my small townhouse compared to my father's mansion. "It's such a shame," they said, "that with your dad living in such a grand place, you ended up buying this tiny house." I explained that despite my father's wealth, I was just a regular office worker with a modest income, and even buying this house was a stretch for me, made possible only with my dad's help on the down payment. Megan, ever materialistic, suggested that my father should have bought me a better place, hinting that surely something must have been left for me by my mother when she passed away suddenly without a will. I tried to set the record straight. Whatever my mother had left was rightfully my father's, and I was content with what I had, not feeling entitled to more. Stephen then made a bold proposal that my father should swap houses with us since he was living alone and didn't need the space, to which Megan eagerly agreed. I was appalled and firmly refused, emphasizing that the house was my father's and he deserved to live there comfortably for the rest of his days. Their response was cold and calculating, pointing out that since my father was ill, they could wait a few years, and eventually everything would be mine to inherit. Their unabashed planning for my future inheritance was deeply disturbing. It was worsened by their frequent suggestions that I ask my father for more money, despite us not being in financial distress. They were clearly fixated on living a millionaire lifestyle without the means. The real crisis unfolded after my father passed away from cancer. I was heartbroken, yet received minimal support from Stephen or Megan, who seemed only interested in when they could hear the will read. They even refused to attend my father's funeral, claiming he meant nothing to them. This left me heartbroken and furious. Reflecting on those times, my father's earlier warnings echoed in my mind, stirring doubts about Stephen and Megan's true intentions. Their behavior had become increasingly hard to overlook, and I began to seriously question the motives behind their actions in our relationship. I couldn't shake the feeling that Stephen and Megan were mainly interested in my inheritance. Their behavior became especially clear during the will reading. Outraged at being excluded, Stephen demanded, "Why the hell can't we be at the reading of the will? Lawrence was my father-in-law after all." Megan chimed in, insisting it was absurd that they, as a family, were not present to know what Lawrence had left behind, especially since her son should have had some claim. The lawyer's response was blunt. "Your son isn't mentioned in the will, Megan, so he cannot attend the reading." I couldn't help but confront them about their obsession with the inheritance, especially since they hadn't even bothered to attend the funeral. It seemed to me that my father was only considered family when there was money involved. Their behavior escalated after the will reading. I returned home to face their incessant questions, despite still mourning my father. They offered no comfort or sympathy, only probing about the details of the inheritance. "So how much did you inherit from your parents? They must have left you a lot, right?" Megan asked eagerly. I replied, more to end their speculation than anything, "Actually, I didn't receive any money. My parents' wealth wasn't left to me." This revelation stunned them. "You got nothing? But your parents were wealthy. They must have left you something. Are you sure you're not hiding it from us?" Stephen accused. I reassured them, "There's no money. You're welcome to check my bank statement soon, but you won't find any changes. As for the rest of their assets, they decided to donate what was left to charity." Their frustration was palpable, and Megan was quick to suggest that I contest the will. "That's ridiculous. You need to fight for your inheritance." But I was firm in my response. "There's nothing to fight for. My parents decided to give their remaining assets to charity. I respect their choice." Stephen and Megan seemed infuriated by my lack of interest in pursuing a fortune that no longer existed. I was baffled by their anger and persistent disbelief, but it only confirmed my suspicions about their true motivations. I was on the verge of revealing everything, but a nagging doubt held me back. I couldn't shake the feeling that Stephen and his mother, Megan, were scheming behind my back. As they continued to press me for details about the inheritance, I stood my ground, firmly repeating that I hadn't received any money, and even suggested I could show them my bank account to prove it in a few days. A month went by, and Stephen's behavior changed dramatically. He became distant and agitated, frequently checking my bank account and badgering me about the inheritance. It became clear to me what his true motivations might be. Finally, I had enough and decided to confront the situation head-on. I showed them my bank statements, confirming that no inheritance had come my way. "See, I wasn't lying. There's no secret inheritance," I asserted, hoping this would settle the matter. However, their reaction was shocking. Stephen exploded. "All our years of effort wasted. So your parents weren't that rich and you didn't even get a dime? This is unbelievable." His disappointment was palpable, and then he said something that broke me. "I stayed in this marriage for nothing. I married you for nothing. It was all a waste." His words cut deep. "What do you mean, Stephen? Why would you say that?" I asked, heart sinking. Megan scoffed. "Who would marry you without considering the money? My son married you expecting we could bank on your inheritance. Now we see you got nothing. I can't believe I wasted 6 years on a useless girl like you. Stephen could have done so much better." Hearing them speak so callously confirmed my worst fears. It was clear now that Stephen had married me for money. My parents had been right about him and his mother. They were nothing but gold diggers. As much as it hurt, what came next was even more crushing. Megan turned to Stephen with a cold, calculating look. "What's done is done, Stephen. But now it's time for you to leave her. There's no reason to stay anymore. You'll have time to find a new, rich wife next time. One who has money." Her words were like a knife. "Are you kidding me, Megan? You're pushing Stephen to divorce me over money?" I asked, my voice trembling. Stephen's silence spoke volumes. It was a defining moment for me. The facade had crumbled, revealing the stark, ugly truth of their intentions. I was heartbroken, but I knew I needed to find the strength to move on from this betrayal. Of course, Stephen's response was chillingly pragmatic. "I married you because I thought it would secure a comfortable life for me and my mom. We've always struggled financially. I didn't go to college and had no real means to earn much. I thought marrying you would change that, assuming your parents would leave you a substantial inheritance that you would share with us." His blunt admission that he had feigned love to secure financial stability stunned me. He continued, "It was the only way I thought I could give my mom the life she deserved. But now, seeing that there's no inheritance, it seems my efforts were pointless. Mom's right, I need to look forward and keep searching. His words, delivered so casually, shook me deeply. As he and Megan vented their frustration, I found myself tuning out, overwhelmed by the enormity of their deceit. Their lack of empathy and Stephen's sudden shift in attitude were both deeply upsetting and infuriating. I was so angry I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I restrained myself. Instead, I responded calmly, "Okay then, Stephen. If a divorce is what you want, then that's what you'll get. I've never been one to deny your requests. Consider this a final favor." Megan, ever the antagonist, jumped in. "Don't think this means you can take alimony from my son. We'll fight you tooth and nail before you see a cent of that." I replied firmly, "You're right, I don't have much money at the moment, so here's what I propose. A mutual divorce with no division of assets or alimony. You don't have much and neither do I right now. If you forego alimony, I'll agree to sign and not claim anything further from you." Stephen and I then discussed the details of our divorce more pragmatically. The conversation was devoid of any emotional connection. It was purely transactional, reflecting the stark reality of our relationship's dissolution. As we negotiated the terms of our divorce, I could tell Megan and Stephen were pleased that I wasn't creating any drama over the process. Perhaps they were surprised by my composed demeanor, not knowing that each day I was privately unraveling. On my way to work, tears streamed down my face, and I often spent hours crying alone in my car before and after work. Neither Stephen nor Megan noticed my puffy eyes or questioned why my daily routine had suddenly extended. Once Megan realized there was no inheritance in my future, she barely acknowledged my existence, only solidifying my resolve to end this marriage swiftly. I made arrangements for Stephen and Megan to move out of my house and into a rented apartment nearby. They settled in quickly, and as the divorce proceedings advanced, Stephen, true to his agreement, did not claim any part of my house. I, in turn, did not seek alimony. To him, it was a straightforward exchange. On the day our divorce was finalized, I decided to take one last step. I visited their rental to return my wedding and engagement rings. Standing at their doorstep, I said, "I just want to return these. This marriage brought nothing but distress into my life, and I prefer not to keep any reminders of it." Megan scoffed, seizing the moment to taunt me. "Are you sure? You might need the money. It's amusing you once looked down on our poverty, and now look at your situation. My son is being generous by letting you keep the rings. You might need to sell them when your job falls through." Her words stung, but I retorted with a laugh, which seemed to confuse both Megan and Stephen. "Why would I need to sell the rings for money, Megan? You don't need to feel embarrassed for me. We already know my parents left me nothing. They lost it all to poor decisions, leaving their daughter with nothing. Or so you think?" My laughter in the face of their cruelty and misunderstanding seemed to unsettle them. I could see a hint of annoyance in Stephen's expression, perhaps embarrassed by his mother's blunt crudeness. As I turned to leave, their baffled faces were a clear sign. They still hadn't grasped the full extent of my independence and resilience. I walked away, knowing I was finally free from their toxicity, ready to rebuild my life on my terms. Stephen was visibly puzzled by my laughter, and Megan, annoyed, demanded, "Why the hell are you laughing? Did I say something funny?" Her disbelief only fueled my amusement. "It's truly hilarious how you think I'm destitute, Megan, and even more amusing that you believe my parents squandered their entire fortune." Megan snapped back, convinced of her narrative. "Of course you're destitute. Your parents didn't leave you a penny. They surely ruined your life by not leaving you an inheritance." I couldn't help but smirk at her misunderstanding. "I never said I didn't receive an inheritance, Megan. I simply told you that I didn't get any money. Indeed, my parents did leave me quite the inheritance." Confusion clouded her face. "What the hell does that mean? You have an inheritance?" I nodded, relishing the moment. "My parents saw right through you and Stephen as the gold diggers you are. So, they included a secret clause in their will. They left me no money, but instead, I inherited this entire neighborhood. Megan's shock was palpable. You own this neighborhood? How is that possible? We would have known about your inheritance. We even signed our lease with an estate manager who didn't mention the owner's name. My parents wanted me to wait for a year before claiming my inheritance, I continued. They wanted me to test you and see if you were with me for money or love. You failed that test and now you won't receive anything from me. The estate manager was appointed by my parents to manage the property until I could claim it. They were very clever, you know. That's impossible. I don't believe a word you're saying. You're just embarrassed because you have no money, Megan retorted, disbelief etched across her face. Stephen chimed in, skeptical yet curious. Oh, really? Is that what you think happened? His tone was mocking, but there was a hint of doubt. Well, why don't we just call the landlord and find out from him? Go ahead, I encouraged, knowing well what the outcome would be. With a mix of defiance and desperation, Megan and Stephen called their landlord, who was indeed the estate manager. As they listened, their expressions transformed from confident to shocked. The estate manager confirmed everything I had said. After hanging up, their faces were a mix of anger and panic. You lied to us, Megan accused, her voice trembling. You tricked us into thinking you had nothing. Standing there, watching their realization dawn, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Their obsession with wealth had blinded them to the value of genuine relationships, and now they were reaping the consequences of their greed and deceit. Stephen and Megan stood there, dumbfounded, as they grappled with the fact that I now owned the entire housing community. You've kept all this wealth to yourself? You tricked Stephen into divorcing you and made sure he wouldn't claim anything, Megan accused, her voice tinged with desperation and betrayal. I couldn't help but laugh at their attempt to twist the narrative. It's quite ironic that you're calling me the trickster, I responded, the irony of their accusation not lost on me. Stephen, you married me under pretenses, claiming love where there was none. Megan, you coached him into this and even pushed for the divorce, thinking there'd be no financial loss for you. If anyone's the scammer here, it's both of you. The truth was simple. They had inquired about my financial gains from the inheritance, and I answered honestly. This was all a big misunderstanding, wasn't it? But what's done is done. It's curious, though, how you're suddenly interested in rekindling things now that you know about my inheritance. And Stephen, aren't you already courting another wealthy woman? Don't worry, I'll make sure she knows exactly who you are. As they realized the severity of their situation, Stephen and Megan began to plead. Stephen even dared to ask me not to interfere with his new relationship if I wasn't willing to give him a second chance. My response was blunt. Get lost. Additionally, I informed them that they would be evicted once the property transfer was finalized. Over the following weeks, they repeatedly showed up at my doorstep begging for forgiveness. Their desperation was palpable, especially since they already had an eviction on their record, which would make finding a new place difficult. The only reason they were still on my property was that I had instructed the estate manager to allow it temporarily. Taking action, I reached out to Stephen's new interest and told her everything. She was appalled by their actions and ended things with him immediately, even showing me their exchange of texts as proof of the breakup. After this debacle, when Stephen and Megan resorted to verbally attacking me, I had no choice but to call the police. Their actions had crossed all boundaries of decency, confirming that my decision to distance myself from them was not just right, but necessary. Once the inheritance was officially transferred into my name, I didn't hesitate to evict Stephen and Megan from the property. They seemed shocked that I followed through with my threat. Despite their initial disbelief, they did attempt to come back onto my property, prompting me to call the police. The officers gave them a stern warning, and I proceeded to file for a restraining order to ensure they would stay away. Word of our altercation quickly spread throughout the town, and soon enough everyone knew about their deceitful behavior. As a result, they found themselves socially ostracized, which forced them to leave the city and try to start afresh elsewhere. Meanwhile, I've been relishing my newfound financial independence. Liberated from the clutches of gold-digging leeches, I'm now free to enjoy my life and the wealth my parents wisely left me, ensuring it would benefit someone who truly appreciated their legacy.